Live. I think we can start with some intros. Why don't you start? Give us a bit of an intro background.
Sure. So thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, so I'm an investment partner at Social Starts and Joyance Partners. We invest in what we call the science and technology of health and happiness. Incorporates a lot of different areas, and we invest in US, Europe, and Asia. So that's me.
Super. John Andre.
I'm the managing partners of J3 Partners AM, which is Labled's European venture capital fund management company. We invest in fintech, insurtech, and health tech in Europe and in Africa because we do have 2 funds as per today.
Awesome, thank you. And what about a personal intro? Tell us a bit about yourself. Oh, what about a personal intro? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, my personal interest. My personal interest. I'm a Taekwondo master. So I've been doing it for more than 25 years. So black belts and for then. I also play piano when I do have time, and I like golfing with my kids when it's possible, because right now all the golf courses are closed in Europe, even in London and in Paris. So for now I can play, but I like golfing and enjoy spending time with my family.
Nice, thank you. Gives a bit of color. What about you, Michael?
So I'm a managing manager at the European Investment Fund, so EIF. There's a subsidiary of the EIB, European Investment Bank, which is basically the development bank of the EU member states. So it's owned by the EU member states. And we are sort of like a specialized arm of the EIB, where we focus on basically increasing access to capital for smaller and medium-sized enterprises. And we are sort of split on sort of like equity and debt and guarantee products. I work on the equity side, and specifically what I do is basically I set up investment programs and manage investment programs, basically funds of funds for various parts of Europe, where we then invest in various VC and private equity funds.
Great.
In terms of personal interests, I like to play with tech. So as of the last probably 2 years, I'm quite a lot into 3D printing. So just doing bits there and there. I'm a board game enthusiast with a large collection, and then just sports here and there, various things. Just kind of spread wide rather than focus too deeply, probably on some areas.
Nice, thank you, Michael. Well, a short thing about who I am. So, welcome everyone. My name is Jonathan Hollis, and I'm the managing partner at Mountainside Ventures. We launched during the pandemic, and we work with both early stage companies and also VCs, helping them get funded. And we've also recently published a report called Capital Behind Venture, which is all around helping early stage emerging fund managers raise funds, and actually might be relevant for you, Neha, and also you, John Andre and Michael. Your organization, of course, the EIF, as one of the biggest LPs in Europe, and we're delighted for you to join us today, was one of the key contributors as well. And the idea for the next 45 minutes or so is we're going to have a number of questions as a panel. Then I'll be moderating. Then we'll ask those listening in for also their thoughts and questions. But feel free to ask questions on the chat, and we'll try and answer them as we go along. So the subject for today is all around funding a fund. So the wonderful world of limited partners. So for those in the audience, limited partners and family offices are those organizations, typically individuals, organizations that fund VC funds. So for those looking, and for those startups in the audience, raising typically startup funding can take you a couple of months to 6 to 9 months. But of course, raising a VC fund, I'm sure these guys will tell you, might take 2, even 3 years. So very different time frame, but a very similar process. Because ultimately you're asking money, you're asking for someone else, another organization, to fund your company. So we thought we'd split the conversation into 3 topics. First one, looking at securing your first LP. The second one, looking at closing the fund. And then the third one, looking at what happens after you successfully raise and understanding the relationship between VCs and LPs. So if we start at the very start, around sourcing and securing your first LP, Maybe Nehal, you can give us a bit of background as to how on earth do you go about sourcing these limited partners? Is there a list that you can email, and how did you go about doing it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm just going to start with there's no one answer. There's no silver bullet. But I would say, much like startups do, you do a little bit of customer segmentation. There's public money, like Michael can talk about EIF and British Bank and all these others. Then you have sort of, some corporates will want to invest, and often they go after strategic things. And then we look at it like we break it down into family offices, high net worth, ultra high net worths, fund of funds. Those are the big categories that we look at and break it down into. And I think, how do you go about finding them? Often it's your personal network in terms of high net worth, family offices, perhaps corporates, people that that you've worked with who trust you. Because a lot of the reason I think the time cycle is so long is because it's not decided over one transaction, right? It's building a relationship, speaking to them many times, outside of COVID, meeting them many times in person, those kinds of things. But also then what kind of fund are you running? Be very clear in terms of what is the kind of fund that you have, what is your thesis, what is your strategy. They will obviously dig into traction, team traction, all those kinds of things. And those will attract different kinds of LPs. There'll be some LPs that want to invest in emerging managers, first-time managers. And then there'll be some funds, some LPs who only want to invest in funds with a strong traction. So, how do you go about finding your first? I'd say first figure out what you are, what you know, and then go after those that you think will match. And it builds on. I could go on, but I'm going to stop there. But it builds on after that. Yeah.
Great advice. So focus on the people you know and figure out actually who your target audience is. I think that sounds very, very sensible. What about you, John Andre? How did you go about raising your fund?
Oh, I'm not so sophisticated as Nia, but for me, it's quite simple. Firstly, I will use my professional network, which is quite interesting after 20 years of working in the banking and insurance industry here in Europe. And secondly, I will attend a lot of events like this one, physically or online, to extend my network to prospective investor I would like to meet. And finally, I will use professional databases provided by very known companies in the industry to source new emails and let my team send emails to propose our investments to some people like Mika. So that's how we used to do at J3 Partners here.
Okay, great. So one of the things you talked about is using third parties to help you with introductions and to help you source contacts. Oh, I was just saying, so one of the ways that you did it is by using third parties to help you source contacts.
No, I don't use third parties. I don't use placement agents. I just subscribe to databases. I don't know if I can say the name here, but databases like Prequin.com or PitchBook, but I don't use them. I just subscribe to have access to the databases so I can check by myself, or my team members can check by themselves and find the email address of people like Mika, as I said it, because sometimes we just want to send emails to them, but we don't know how to have an email address. So we need to have access to this kind of addresses. So we have to have access to the databases provided by the third parties you are talking about, but we don't use them to do the job for us. No, we are doing it by ourselves.
Got it. Okay, got it. So accessing databases. And I guess, Mikhail, how do you...
That's the third option.
Yeah.
The third. First, network, my own network. Second, events, attending events like this one and many other events. And the third options, having access to some database.
Got it. And out of the three options, which one do you find the most relevant and where you get the most traction?
The first one, my my professional network, because what I learned from this is that people trust you easily when they know you.
Yeah.
And it's easy for them to trust you if you have been introduced by someone they already know. So my professional network, and the second one is events, the financial events, because they can meet you. You can have one-to-one meeting and build the trust. So
got it.
The first options are the best.
Got it. And presumably now events are mostly online. It's events like these, right? When we're doing panels and virtual roundtables that are becoming a lot more common. And Michael, I guess what's the best way of you getting known in the market? Do you do a lot of these kind of panels? And how do you propose VCs reach out to you?
Well, typically because of our huge presence on the market, I mean, as you said, right, we were one of the leading LPs in Europe. I think I recall in 2016, we might have even attempted to sort of measure our presence. And so I remember some figures saying something like we are present in 40% of all the funds launched that year, which is a huge number, obviously.
Yeah.
And, you know, in our portfolio cumulatively in the past 20 years, we have accumulated probably something like just under 1,000, you know, funds or some other types of intermediary vehicles similar to funds. So just through the sheer presence, we don't necessarily need to, you know, reach out actively. We're basically just there. Typically, people know about us or learn about us through different conferences, because obviously we are participating in a lot of events. So so those who might not know us typically learn about us through such events, or other publicly available information, because through many programs that we implement, we get a lot of sort of associated marketing, let's say. So people should know about us just through those means. Now, how do people reach to us? We are an institution of now something around 550 people, right? So we need to have processes. You know, we need to have a bit more structured than it's, let's say, a small family office or an institutional player is just sort of growing its presence. So we do have dedicated, if you go on our website, there are even dedicated channels through which you can apply. You can, of course, always also just reach out to a person that you've met at an event, that the representative of VIF that you met at an event. Despite the fact that we are growing and we are becoming a bit large, you can still just have an informal chat as well. So it doesn't have to be all strictly, you know, procedural and so on. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to add something on the other sort of thoughts that were mentioned.
Well, I think that covers it. One particular thought, it'd be good to get your advice, and I'm sure the people in the audience would love to hear it. Is we can probably agree that the EIF sees most VCs who are currently raising in Europe. And it'd be interesting to understand what you look for when you're assessing opportunities, specifically VC opportunities, who ultimately it's all about the network and the power to close the best deals, right? So it'd be interesting what qualitative and quantitative measures you apply to those.
Right. So in general, we are not much different from a private investor. So we look at the same things as a private investor. Now, if I was to talk only about this, you know, we could be here all night and not be done. So if I had to sort of make it short, let's say the three key areas that we would look at would be the team, obviously the people who are pitching into us the fund, their investment strategy. So whether it makes sense, you know, whether it's based on an actual opportunity in the market, whether they themselves have the experience to deliver it, whether they're able to source the deals that they would like to source under that investment strategy. And obviously, as was already mentioned, track record is quite an important factor, and sometimes basically the deal breaker. But at the same time, we finance a ton of first-time teams, so who may not have any track record or a very limited one, or on a very individualized basis, like some small business angel investments and so on. But we also finance actually or back teams that basically have only limited investment experience and have some other relevant experience that brings value to the fund. like I don't know, entrepreneurial track record. So they show that they can be close to the startup ecosystem. They have the connection and so on. But they always needs to be some investment basis, of course. Like you cannot be just a bunch of guys who never made investments and never pitching a fund to us. But we do see value in other types of experience as well, despite the fact that it does make it harder, of course, to raise a fund without a track record. And when we talk about track record, or at least I personally certainly often see people thinking that, oh, I've made investments, so that's a track record. Well, no, track record means that you also need to realize those investments. You need to make exits. You need to show that those investments actually were good calls, that you managed to bring value to those companies and actually managed to make a return for your LPs. And just coming back to the fund, obviously, I didn't mention it as the first item coincidentally. It is the most crucial one because oftentimes also we see opportunistic teams coming together where they just barely met. Basically, they met a couple of months ago. Now they think, oh, we can put together a fund, and on paper it looks good. But we're looking for someone whom we can work with for the next, let's say 10 plus years. So we need to be sure that this is the team that will stay together, that will work together, that will be able to deliver. Because we've seen it not once, not twice, of course, but many times that, a partner leaves, there is a misunderstanding, there is a conflict or something. So you need to convince us that this is the team that will be there for the whole fund duration, right?
Interesting. Thank you, Michael. And John Andre, what are some of the things that you did to convince your LPs that you were worth a shot?
I do have two kinds of LPs. LPs coming from my network already know me. So before starting this activity of fund management, I was consultant. So I did start as IT consultant and later becoming strategic consultant. So since I say that I will be investing in fintech, tech, and insurtech, they knew that's something I already mastered because as IT consultant, I've been dealing with a lot of banking solutions in my past life. So investors coming from my private network did not use to do their due diligence according to my track record. The family offices we are working with did the due diligence, and since that was our first fund, it was a little bit difficult. It was a little bit difficult because even if they don't like to say it like this, the track records counts because the more profitable investment you will have made earlier, the more you will be trusted by a lot of LPs. So they ask. So it was a little bit difficult. Some of them, even EIF, told me, let's close this first fund and come back to us for the second one. We will be more willing to invest in your fund because we can't see how you are going to sustain the value creation for us. So when they say they don't look at the track record, it's a little bit it's not true at all. They are always checking, and it's all about. I think you must also be a little bit lucky. That's why one-to-one meeting, physical meeting is really important because the investor can decide to follow you at his first sight. The way you will talk to him, the way you will reply to his answers, the way you will talk about your investment strategy is something the experienced investors can feel at one-to-one meetings. So one-to-one meetings is really important because you can also have everything in mind and come and tell about that if you could do it. And you can talk on the phone saying that, all right, and email saying that I will bring you the paradise. But when you are in front of a guy, he can feel it. The more experience he's got, the more skill he has to feel when you are pitching beforehand.
And first impressions presumably count a lot.
Yes. I think Michael can certify that first impressions counts a lot. Yes.
Great. And I suspect that Michael doesn't want to hold that responsibility of toning you down for the second fund, 500 person organization. But I'm sure he can he'll be able to look into that for you. We've had a couple of questions as well, which I'm going to try and dip in and out of as we go. A simple question for you. I hope simple question for you, Michael, from Robin. What typically what proportion of the 50 million fund would you look to back?
So our general guidelines would be that we do not invest above 50% of the fund. So 50% is sort of our maximum. We don't always go up to the 50%. So there has to be some reason why we would. And there are some occasions where we do actually exceed the 50%. So we had even in the past a few funds, very, very few, but nevertheless, that we financed up to almost 100%. There was always at least the team commitment because we want to be aligned with the fund manager. We want to be aligned with the investment team. But we are basically the only LP in the fund. But this happens very rarely. It's a very specific fund with a very specific focus in a very specific market where, for example, private capital basically does not participate in this asset class, but it does happen sometimes. So the simple answer would be up to half of it, but then there is a more complicated answer as well.
Great, thank you very much. Returning back to I think we're returning back to the questions that I laid out around securing your fund and actually the second stage, which was all around closing. Nehal, could you tell us a bit about your experiences in finding that cornerstone investor, what that was like, and how you actually managed to close the fund? Was it a bit like herding cats, or was it much more professional and civilized than that?
Nightmare. So it's really difficult because depending on who you're raised from, and I'll say COVID has made this very hard because you can't go and camp outside their front door and say sign the document. It's been you have to juggle a lot, right? I mean, with some funds at the first close you only need 20% of the liquidate of the money, and then after, when you actually close the fund, it's a full amount. So we've had experiences with a single LP and we've had experiences with multi-LP. So with a single LP, it's easy. If you have a good relationship with them, you have a very trusting relationship, it's very intimate, it's very close. And it's, of course, there's a lot of back and forth, and I'd say legalities is the hardest bit. And that can be frustrating. I think the timeline is the hardest thing. Everyone's like, I just want to get it done. I want to get it done. But it takes time regardless of whether it's a single LP or a multi-LP. In a multi-LP fund, you have to juggle, right? Because there'll be some LPs who come in with a really small ticket size, and that's fine. They're just as important as the big ticket size LPs. It's not as if one is better than the other. But some of them will, some will come with responses like, actually, the money I thought that was going to liquidate isn't liquidating yet. So actually, can I put it in 6 months' time and not now? And you had made your plans according to X amount. And so you have to be ready for any eventuality, regardless of where you come from. And I know, like with public money, it can take up to a year for them to even say, I kind of like you, or I don't like you, and no offense, Michael, but, understandably, right? Unless you you have a trusting relationship, it's tough. I'd say that you will experience everything from the easiest LP who'd be like, oh, I love you guys, here's my money, to a guy who will drag it out 2-3 years before he gives you money. And you just have to be ready for any eventuality along that spectrum. It's not easy, is all I'd say.
And it's tough, right? In the report, we found that actually only 20% of VCs had been able to close an LP within a year. For the majority, it's a 2 to 3 year relationship. To give a bit more, perspective and flavor on that, Nehal, can you tell us a bit about the numbers, the number of meetings you've had versus successful closes?
Oh my God, I wish I had like tabulated this actually. I don't know. I mean, to take somebody from, hey, I'm meeting you for the first time, to yes, here's my check, at least, I don't know, 10, 15 meetings at a minimum. And that too is then with a lot of text messages and WhatsApp messages and, hey, can we go for pre-COVID? It was, let's go for a drink, let's meet. I really want to understand your strategy. I want to understand your team. Team dynamics is so important. I think that was already highlighted before. Can't underestimate that. And track record. They will catch you out. If it's a professional LP, they will want to go through every single investment you've made, every single realization, how much you've put in. They will also want to know where is their money going, right? So you have to have a very clear flow through of, if I give you, say, X million and you're taking 2% for fees, where is each penny going? So, there's this fallacy that venture capital has a lot of free cash. Not the case. We don't have an office for the very reason that we don't want to put money into a co-working space, pre-COVID I'm talking about, because that money could easily go into either hiring an extra person or ideally into another startup that will bring returns into the business, right? So I would say that, God, I mean, anything from 10 meetings up to 100, I mean, it's crazy. And then the number of no's you get also is a lot. It literally is, kissing a lot of frogs to find the prince. I don't have numbers. I wish I had numbers, but it's a lot. Maybe Jean-Andre or Michael will have some numbers, but yeah, it's a lot.
Thank you.
100.
It's tough, right? I mean, raising fund, especially if you're an emerging fund manager. And one of the reasons why we're running this panel is to discuss some of the challenges. One of the questions that was asked was around problems during diligence and I guess red flags. It'd be good to understand what red flags you've seen, Michael, and also whether there's any tips you can provide for fund managers so that to avoid stumbling during the DD phase.
Sure. So there are a ton of red flags, like from everything you can imagine can have a red flag. In principle, just to sort of give a bit of an explanation, so we have our main investment process has 3 stages. So it's basically, once you have a pitch deck ready, or a private placement memorandum, or whatever kind of document you want to present to us, where you basically talk about yourself and your fund and your strategy, you can send it to us, and we start our investment process, and we call this the first screening. Yeah. And if we like what we see, we might have some questions. We might call you. We might go through some things. But in general, it's basically in our internal review. If we like what we see, and there are not too many, not even question marks, I would say exclamation marks, then we will invite you, and you will actually present to us your fund in person. This is the second screening. And once we're done with that, we actually go into due diligence, where we basically visit your team, your premises, and we go through all the details. We take 1 or 2 days or something like that. And then after that, if everything is fine, of course, we'll process our own internal documents, and we'll process the investment, approve it at the board, and so on. Now, most of the funds stumble already at the first stage, because once you have the opportunity to come and present it yourself, if you can make also a good impression, if you can sort of reinforce the right points in your proposal and so on, it makes a difference. But the first stage is you need to make an effort and prepare a good pitch that basically is able to stand on its own legs. Frequently, you have things like, okay, I'm pitching to you some investment strategy, and then I show you my potential prospective deal flow, the opportunities that I've already identified, and they're totally not in line with the investment strategy. Like they're saying, oh, we'll be a deep tech fund, and they show you some, I don't know, like manufacturer of slippers, or something. I don't know. I'm making up stuff, but there is a huge inconsistency across the whole pitch. Now, this is an example of it, but inconsistency is something, at least I personally see a lot. So I would certainly recommend to try to be consistent. Well, you should be consistent. You shouldn't be trying, but you should be consistent in what you're pitching. The whole thing should make sense, meaning you've identified the market, you have identified the opportunity on the market, you have identified the right investment strategy to address that market. You can show that you have the experience to deliver the investment strategy. You can show that you see opportunities on the market that actually are aligned with the investment strategy. It's basically a story, right? It needs to make sense from A to Z. And oftentimes it simply doesn't. It falls apart at some point because it's opportunistic, because they come up with something that sounds sexy. They use buzzwords that don't have any substance behind them, and so on. So these are sort of the things. So don't do that. Like, just don't do that. You know, write things that make sense. Write things that you have relation to, that are relevant to you, and you can prove that they're relevant to you. So also, for example, pitching an investment strategy which you don't have experience with doesn't make any sense. So you might be a A-grade investor who did, you know, private equity deals, you know, buyouts across Africa. I don't know, just making a case. And now you're pitching to us seed fund focused on North America. Well, you might have investment experience, but this is not relevant investment experience to us. This will not convince us, right? So focus on your strengths. Definitely tell us, how are you different from everyone else? Almost everybody forgets about this. Well, you're another seed fund, you know, in Europe, of which, especially us, we have seen hundreds. So tell us how you're different. What's your USP? What's your unique special proposition? You know, so this we don't see very often. And of course, keep to the industry standards. So there have been occasions where we've seen a strong team. We like the team. We like the investment strategy. We're ready to back them, but they're asking for some weird management fee. They're asking for some weird carried interest. There are some other weird terms in the fund where, you know, there's a sponsor, there's somebody who controls the whole structure from behind, who's not, you know, not a standard LP. There are a lot of things that can break down a proposal despite its let's say commercial merits, you know. And this is sort of the last thing that can kill a pitch. So just don't do it, you know. To be you know, small is independent team, independent from outside influence that is responsible for the investment process from A to Z, who sources the deals, who invests in the deals, who makes its own investment decisions without outside influence, who you know, manages those deals, brings value to those companies, and exits them without special conditions, especially if you're a first-time team. Yes, of course, we have seen established fund managers, you know, with X number of funds behind them, with, you know, returning 5-10 times the funds. I mean, it's a bit exaggerating mostly, but certainly there are a few like that as well, who can ask for, you know, an extra return because they have delivered. They have proven that they are a fund manager that will be highly sought after. They'll have an oversubscribed fund. They can ask for a carry, you know, beyond the, let's say, typical 20% that you see on the market. But your first-time team asking for a super carry is ridiculous. Yeah. So this we see, and unfortunately, it can break down an otherwise good quality investment proposal.
Thanks, Michael. I mean, that was really valuable, and I think lots of really useful tips for those VCs out there, and actually very similar to some of the results we found. You know, one of the things that we found when we surveyed LPs was that GPs certainly did not need to innovate in a fee structure. As in, what you know, you might as well just keep to as standard as you possibly can for all the things that, you know, LPs care about, or the things that you don't need to innovate on, but innovate on your differentiation, innovate on your team, innovate on your strategy, which I think you echoed a lot. The other interesting thing I picked up is that a lot of the advice that you gave, I could imagine myself giving that to early stage companies we're working with. You know, make sure that, you know, you've got a great team with domain experience, make sure your pitch deck is consistent. And actually a lot of the advice that GPs and VCs are getting is quite similar to the advice they're providing to their own startups, which I think is simply because of the art of fundraising. So we heard on some things that that Michael wants in a VC. John Andre and Neha, it'd be good to understand, flip the question around. What do you guys look for in an LP? John Andre, do you want to start? You know, what are the things that you want from an investor in your fund if you were going to be super picky?
As I already said it, even for the LP, I will look for his track record because. Once again, the more profitable investment the LP will have made, the more will be trusted by a lot of other LPs who will be willing to invest beside him.
Interesting.
So Yeah, so the quality of your LP counts a lot, because when people, for example, if you say that I do have the European Investment Fund as LP, you won't have to talk too much to attract other institutional investors, because they will think that if you do have an EIF, that means they already have done the due diligence requested to qualify you as an interesting fund manager. So after that, the process will be more easy for you. So the quality of your first LPs are really important to attract the other LPs. That's what that's why I'm looking for the track record of the LP. And because that's the only way to ease the process for me after. But as first-time fund manager, it's a little bit difficult. That's why you also need to have in your network a lot of people who know a lot of people to introduce you to the good LPs. We can help. We will help you to raise your first fund. That's what I can say, because for me, it's all about the quality of your first LPs.
I can just imagine you in the VC meeting, John-Andre, after you've pitched your fund, asking them to tell you about their own track record.
No, I don't. Normally, that's a work we used to do before going to see them. So we know, according to the quality of the LP, we can compose our team, and we can propose the best colleagues to talk to the LP according to his quality, because we are ranking them. And we say we need to have this LP among our investors. So we are going to do our best to catch him. So it will attract more LPs for us, because the big LPs used to invest with aside over big LPs. So it's really important we don't ask them their track record, because that will mean that we did not do our homework. And it could be really dangerous for us. When we arrived before them, we have all the information about them. So that's more easy, knowing that we did our job before coming to meet them, than going there and asking, can you tell about your track record?
Oh, it was a bit of humor, but I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very good point, because often, you know, it's important for VCs to ensure that the investors in their fund are credible and are of high quality. So I think you make a really good point. What about you, Nehal? What are the things that you're looking for in your LPs? Do you want them to have similarly ambitious track records, or anything else you look for?
No, I think, of course, the track record is nice, but there are also, much like there are first-time GPs or emerging managers, there are also first-time LPs who are figuring things out, particularly next-generation family offices, right? There are a lot of those who are like, I don't want to do traditional stuff anymore, I want to do new things. So for us, it's been a lot of, it's going to sound very cliche, but honesty, just having an open, honest conversation, right? So when we were raising Social Starts, we were having open, honest conversations. We focus on health and happiness. This is what we do, blah, blah, blah. Through all of that, we actually ended up getting a very, very large corporate LP, which is how we have both a single LP fund and a multi-LP fund, right? And the relationship was born out of the fact that they loved what we do, but they didn't want to share, but in a good way, in the sense that they wanted a sliver of that particular thesis and a sliver of that particular area. And we sat down, and it was some of the managing partners at the time. So we said, look, we love you guys, you love us, let's sit down. What is it that you actually want? They hashed out exactly what it was, and they've given us a large amount of money as a result, and creating a whole new fund out of it as a result. So what is it that we want? I guess, you know, in venture is supposed to be about innovation, getting behind cutting edge technologies and pushing the boundaries. So if there are LPs who are also willing to do the same, then I would welcome that and be flexible to the way we work. But I also like personally, this is a very personal thing, I like to have quite a personal relationship with the LPs, because we often offer them co-investments, right? So of course, putting money into the fund is one thing, but some of our companies, when they get bigger, and we had this during COVID, when they're hitting B and C, because we're an early stage investor, we often offer up the co-investment opportunity. And that has been a great working relationship that I have learned and I'd like to see more of. So yeah, I guess, forward-thinking LPs would be nice.
Absolutely. And sometimes you can't be as picky, right? As I'm sure you know.
Yeah,
it's tricky.
I'll take it.
in an ideal world, it's all about the quality LPs. And I think we'll move on to a few questions, given we've got kind of 5-10 minutes left. James from Love Ventures was asking about fees. So I suspect his question is around in the UK. Michael, you might be familiar. There's a number of tax efficient schemes for VCs, EIS and VCT funds, where instead of raising from organizations, from corporates and institutions like yourselves, you can raise from retail investors. And there's a divide between retail investors and institutional investors. And retail investors in the UK make up a large proportion of early stage fundraising. So I guess a bit of context for this question. James was asking what LPs' attitudes are towards GPs charging their fees to LPs or to their retail investors or directly to startups. What are your, I guess anyone on the panel, do you have any thoughts on that? And maybe Neha and John-Andre, what are your thoughts when you've been discussing this with LPs? And Michael, what are your thoughts when you're looking at your summary page of that VC pitch deck? Have you seen them charge fees to startups? And if not, and if so, what amount? And if not, why? I'll start with you, Michael.
Okay. So, I mean, generally, we don't see this often. I have to say that also, personally, I don't work much with UK funds, so I don't know whether it would appear there or not, whether such funds would be pitching to us. In principle, more often than not, we would not like this if we saw this investment proposal. When I say not like this, I mean fees charged to startups. Because despite the fact that obviously as an LP, we might have a commercial incentive to save money, our own money, therefore not pay fees to the fund, it's a service that they provide to us, and they need to be aligned with us as their clients. So we are their clients, they're providing a service to us, investment service to us, and we're paying for that service. And that service is supposed to pay for the running of the fund. If they, on top of that, start, charging some additional money, that sort of distorts the motivation, because we don't want actually the fund managers to be motivated by the fees, right? We want them to be motivated by carried interest. That's what's supposed to motivate their investments. So if they sort of create this additional source of revenues for them, they might not really care about the carry maybe as much, because they would run a huge surplus. Well, huge depends. Surpluses, on an annual basis just from this revenue stream, and we would be misaligned with them as an LP, because we want them to be motivated not by these fees, which would then also impact the way they basically carry out their activity, but by the carried interest they would get from the successful realization of those investments. Just a few sort of thoughts.
And I think that's probably in the UK, the difference typically to what we've seen is that for traditional LPVC, and for those listening, this might be interesting for you as well. The traditional LPVCs typically don't charge fees to the startups, but EIS and VCT funds who typically the fee structure is smaller for their retail investors, they do charge fees to the startups in order to operate the fund. And so instead of having the 220 fee mechanism, it's slightly different for those organizations. But from your perspective, a traditional LP VC fund should not be charging fees to its startups.
Exactly. And also, I mean, if you charge those fees, obviously it might impact their deal flow as well, right? Because some startups may simply dislike this quite strongly, and understandably, and might not want to engage with you simply because of this, right? So it's also maybe not a major factor, but certainly it is somewhat of a factor. So just here to add, oftentimes when we actually have GPs having sort of separate revenue streams, like, for example, getting a fee, whether from a startup, of, let's say, from a position in a board of the startup or somewhere. We actually, in the LPAs we sign, typically we have a condition where such fees would be offset against the management fee. So they would get less management fee from us if they get such fees, or we prohibit them outright. This would depend a bit on the definitions, on the specific circumstances, but in general, so not always and 100%, but in general, we don't like to see such fees being charged.
And Neha or Jean-Andre, any experiences for you to share on fees?
No, sorry. No, go. Well, quickly, we don't charge startups, so I don't know enough to comment either way. But I don't think we ever will.
We don't charge startups, but what I would like to say is that in Europe, the regulators oblige us to show our fees. When you send what we call the key investor information documents, you put your different fees you are going to charge to the investors. So they have all the information before investing in your fund. And in our key investor information documents, there is no fees to be charged to the startups. We are living with annual management fees we are charging to the LPs, and as Michael said, it's on the carried interest, because the carried interest is how we can show to the investor that we are sure to reach the expected internal rate of return and to surperform it, to beat it. So we prefer to base our strategy on the carried interest instead of charging the startups we are investing in.
Okay, thank you, John-Andre. A question from Adriana, but if you could rephrase your second question, that would be good. Her first question was, how can VCs identify who invest in first-time fund managers? Any tips beyond, using lists, using your network, going to events and asking? Are there lists specifically for emerging fund managers? How did Neha and John-Andre, how did you guys go about doing it, given that it was your first fund when you raised?
Can you say it again? Because
how can you tell whether an LP invests in first-time fund managers or not?
How can I tell?
I would ask, right? I mean, go to everyone and ask, because particularly private money, you don't know. There'll be a family office, an ultra high net worth individual that will take a chance on you. And then I don't want to speak for Michael, but I know like British Business Bank and Michael, they have set programs for emerging managers, which is on their website, and you can look at them. And there are lots of programs out there for new up and coming emerging VC managers. So have a go.
Yes, I think Nia got it right. I think the same as her. As she, and nothing else to ask.
Great. Well, let's guys, let's finish with a quick summary of your fund. I guess the thesis. I think probably Neha and John-Andre, and also how to contact you. If you're happy to be contacted, of course.
Yeah. Shall I go?
Yes,
you go
first.
So I already said we're the science and technology of health and happiness. It's basically everything health we do, and then happiness obviously is basically the vision was how can we best enable individuals or population people to become the best version of themselves that they can be. And so for us, that has broken down into multiple areas in the happiness field. We play around with it a lot. It's broken down into education, consumer goods, but we do health. I know, Jonathan, you asked about sex tech. We're willing to go look at everything from there, diagnostics, proteomics, genetics. We're a team of scientists, all been entrepreneurs and before and now coming to the space. And then contacting me, I'd say LinkedIn is the best way, or I'm happy to give my email out. Or if they contact the organizers of this, I'm sure they're happy to give my email out.
Thank you. John-Andre?
Yes, please. I've got internet issue here.
Sorry.
So
How best to contact you, if at all?
oh, how best to to contact me? We do have our website, j3partnersam.net. Also, LinkedIn, because I'm connected on my smartphone, so it's more easy to reach me on my LinkedIn. I think that will be the best way to do it, because my professional email is really busy. It's really busy, so we are looking for innovative entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the financials and insurance and health sectors. And we are also looking to people who do have a clear execution plan of the projects. We don't buy strategy. We only buy execution, because at the end of the day, it's all about the executions. You could have the best strategy. If you can't implement your strategy, you will fail. So as investors, what we buy is the execution plan. Because if you have the money, you can buy some smart people to design, to develop the software for you. But after that, what are you going to do with the software? Which strategy are you going to implement to create the value for your investors? And how are you going to sustain this value creation for your investors? The only way to be able to do it is to have a good execution plan. And if you don't have the execution plan, but you only have the idea in your mind, we don't buy it. So that's something all the smart startup willing to be in contact with us must keep in their mind. We are looking for a good execution plan, because the good execution plan can arrange a lot of bad strategy. That's all I can say.
Thank you. And Michael?
Easy. I mean, LinkedIn, definitely. Even just, shoot me an email if you want. My email address is the initial of my first name dot my surname @eif.org. So relatively simple. And of course, if you want to contact the EIF in general, through the website, definitely. Although we obviously don't do direct investments. We do co-investments across the GPs in our portfolio, along the GPs in our portfolio, but we don't actually directly source startups or other companies and invest into them by ourselves. We do have information that could be of interest to such people on our website. So if you go to our website, you can find lists of the funds we have invested in. So you might actually learn about new VCs to approach. And we also do have some sort of maps actually. So you pick a country, and it will tell you what sort of sources of funding potentially could be available to you, at least those backed by EIF in that country. So I do encourage you to go and have a look.
Thank you, Michael. Very useful for not only VCs but also startups out there listening. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Neha. Thanks, John and Drew, and thanks, Michael, for a useful panel. And thank you for being so honest and open for the last hour.
Thank you, Jonathan, for moderating.
No problem. Speak, guys, soon, and thanks everyone for listening in.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.